So here we are in Parashat Tisa, and before we dive into a topic in depth, I would like first to ask folks to tell me, and you can just put it in the chat, whereabouts in the Torah are we? Big picture, what's happened thus far, what hasn't yet happened. We're in the Book of Exodus, excellent, good job, Elka. We're on Highway 281 in West Texas. Okay, so we're at Sinai, good. Good. All right. So we've left Egypt. We've come to Mount Sinai. We've received the Torah. And now we're in the section of the Torah which is lots of laws, particularly regarding the setting up of a sacred space for God to dwell, the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And someone points out that Torah is not chronological. It's a great principle for the rabbis, that there's no before or after in the way that the Torah is set down, that it's not necessarily in chronological order. However, here we are in Parashat Tisa. Moses has gone up the mountain to receive instruction, and now we get to what's actually in this parasha. So now let's hone in. Someone already said, it begins with the taking of the first census of the Israelite men who are, well, really of military service, capable of military service is probably the implication. And then we hear a little bit more about creating the sacred space, about creating a wash stand, which is part of the tabernacle, about some of the anointing oil and the incense. And then, as a number of people have said, the golden calf is made and commandments are broken, the people are forgiven, and the attributes of God are revealed. 13 sacred names of God, which will, we're told, invoke divine mercy throughout the ages. Great. A few other things also happen in this parasha, including that Moses sets up something called the Ohel Moed, or tent of meeting, where God apparently comes to visit with him in a pillar of cloud. And then the parasha actually ends with what some scholars think may even have been the original, before there was a 10 Commandments, there was what's called the cultic dodecalogue, which means the cultic 12 commandments. And if you look at the very end of the parasha, you'll see another set of 12 things that Jewish people might consider central, some of which are very relevant and heartening to this day, such as it begins with celebrate Pesach and celebrate Shavuot and other things we might recognize. And it also has the famous injunction not to cook a calf in its mother's milk, as well as some less palatable stuff about kicking everybody else out of the land and generally being kind of genocidal. So that's maybe one reason the cultic dodecalogue doesn't get that much airtime, but those who are interested, go check it out. However, as you very sensibly honed in on, this is the parasha where we get not only what some teachers call the original sin, Judaism's original sin. We don't really believe that eating the fruit in the garden was something that put humanity into a state of sin. However, we do say that making an idol shortly after the revelation, or probably after the revelation at Sinai, was a very bad mistake and something that the Jewish people needed to recover from in their relationship with God, and that needed some pretty serious spiritual repair. And in fact, Moses says to God, firstly, Moses pleads with God to forgive the people, and then actually sort of says to God, if you're not going to forgive the people, take me out of this book. I don't want any part of this. And at this point, God reveals what's called the 13 midot, the 13 attributes of grace. So in a second, I'll post the source sheet right here in the chat, and you can hopefully copy and paste that into your browser. And actually, maybe I'll share my screen. The very first thing is, let's look at these 13 attributes and what they are. This is Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 and 7. Oh, sorry, forgot to give it a little more detail. This is the part where Moses says to God, show me your face. I need to see you. And God says, nobody can see me. And then there's this whole business with like, get in the cleft of the rock and I'll cover you with my hand and you can see me after I pass. But what's revealed apparently is Moses receives this revelation of these names, which go as follows. Vayavor Hashem al panav, God passed over him, passed across his face, and he cried. It doesn't say who cried. Someone cried. Hashem, Hashem, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, El Rachum V'Chanun, a power that is, these are all untranslatable, of course, that is merciful and gracious. Erech Apayim, extremely patient. V'Rav Chesed, and abounding in loving kindness. Ve'emet, and in truth. Notzer Chesed Lalafim, storing up loving kindness for thousands. Noseh Avon V'Fesha, lifting up or sort of alleviating or relieving wrongdoing. Avon V'Fesha V'Chata, 3 types of wrongdoing. V'Nakeh, and cleansing. And then it says Lo Yinakeh, not entirely cleansing. Poked Avon Avot al Banim, remembering the sin of the fathers unto their children, V'al B'nei Banim, and their children's children, Al Shlishim V'al Rubeim, the 3rd and 4th generations. Okay, and then it continues from there. So before we actually dive in and start to investigate this powerful phrase and where else it comes up and what we can learn about it and learn from it, I'm first going to play a recording so we can just sink into the sound of these powerful verses for a moment. This is an Israeli band called Diwan Haleh.
ويا بردنا يا البناب ويقرا
I like that and its feeling of sort of cultic power. I'm curious before we dive in, does anyone have any anything to say about the 13 attributes of grace that you already are eager to share? It's Middle Eastern music. It's a Middle Eastern band. I mean, obviously there have been Jews in the Middle East for, unbroken for thousands of years. I think the majority of the band members are Mizrahi. Someone else does the music intentionally sound Arabic. I know that the recording also has Amharic, and I don't even actually know all the languages. It's a Jewish group. So I don't have a link for that recording on hand, but I'll find one for you. So, any thoughts about the text of these 13 attributes of grace? Or shall we Don't we pray this on Yom Kippur? Very good, Heidi. And in fact, let's ask that as a bigger question. Where else are we familiar with these phrases? Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun Erech Apayim, Rav Chesed Ve'emet. Oh, good question. How do they count the number 13 for this list? We could spend the entire time discussing that. It's not very simple to count 13. Good question. Yes, the rabbis dispute. Good. Margot says, we also says this on the other holidays or the 3 festivals. Okay, so one place that we use this in the liturgy, this phrase, and actually we'll look in a second, we'll see that it cuts out the bit when we use it liturgically. We take out the bit about visiting the sins of the fathers on the 3rd and 4th generation. We just say God alleviates it, and then actually cut it off mid-sentence so that it changes the meaning quite significantly. But it's chanted in front of the open ark at the beginning of the Torah service on the most important holy days of the year, on Passover, on Sukkot, on Shavuot, and also Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And it's also part of the liturgy for all of the fast days. Now, you might or might know this, might be obvious, but fast days in the Jewish calendar are seen as alleviating karma, basically. It's a way for us to lift sin and sort of get back on the right track. So unsurprisingly, we use this phrase here as well. Someone says hi holidays. Good. Somebody says God's compassion is a dominant function over their anger. Right. This is the gist of it, that God's mercy is more fundamental. It's a more fundamental quality of the divine than any kind of need to keep the order of strict justice in the world, and that we're reminding God of that. Good. Okay. Tanya points out that there's this idea that the God of the Hebrew scriptures is wrathful, mean, and full of vengeance, which is a false idea. I mean, certainly God in the Hebrew Bible does seem to sometimes be quite exacting of punishment, but I do agree. I think it's basically a sort of it's a Christian theological move of saying, like, Old Testament, God, cross. New Testament, Jesus, lovely. And yeah, I think this text is a great reminder that our picture of God is abundant in compassion and grace. Indeed. Okay. So let's go back to looking. This is a very good conversation. So let's pause for a second here. This idea of how do things get carried forward into the 3rd and 4th generations, and what does that really mean? Some folks in the chat here saying, God, even if God does cut off our sins and forgive us, our actions still affect our families. And even if we have, even if we've been forgiven, there's still an impact which is ongoing. And somebody else says she feels this is to do with reincarnation, where self meets self. Yeah. These are very good questions. Okay, I want to bring us back to the source sheet to see that, in fact, in addition, before it ends up in our liturgy in these very crucial places, thank you so much, Mara. I'm going to share my screen again. Before it ends up in our liturgy, in fact, this phrase or something very like it shows up numerous other places in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. Oh, I'll also point out the idea, the Talmud and Tractate Rosh Hashanah, where unsurprisingly they're talking about teshuvah, about returning and forgiveness. They talk about this passage at length and discuss it. We'll maybe have time to look at it more. But one of the key things I want to point out is this claim that this these 13 attributes constitute what's called a covenant. What is a covenant in your own words? Can't see the chat. Hang on. What's a covenant? It's an agreement or a contract. Yes, a pact. It's stronger than just an agreement. It's more like a contract. Yes, it's commitment. It's commitment. A treaty, a binding contract. Exactly. So the rabbis say this is a covenant, meaning God is now committed to continue to respond when this particular formula of these 13 attributes is invoked, right? And we see that there are various other places in the Tanakh where some version of this phrase is used, starting in Numbers chapter 14. For all my keen beans out there, what happens in Numbers chapter 14? You can look it up, or I can tell you. If we say that the golden calf is the original sin of the Jewish people, then the sin of the spies or the scouts who go into the land and come back and say, oh, we can't do it. Yeah, the land is beautiful, but we're never going to make it, is the second great sin. And indeed, at this point again, there's doubt about the future, what's going to happen, and Moses does indeed invoke this formula. He says, Hashem erech apayim v'rav chesed, noseh avon v'fesha, v'nakeh lo yinakeh. So you can hear it's similar. It's not exactly the same, but it clearly echoes this text. He says to God, you're abundantly merciful and forgiving of iniquity and patient. Forgive these people. And God does indeed relent and say, well, okay, it's gonna take a while, in fact, to the second or third generation, and then the people will be able to go into the land. Interestingly, the Talmud in Tractate Sanhedrin unpacks that and says, originally when God gave these 13 attributes to Moses in our Parashat in Tisa, Moses was like, oh, that's very nice. Does this only apply to the righteous? And God was like, no, this applies to the wicked as well. I'm going to be patient and forgiving for everyone. And Moses is like, oh, the wicked don't deserve it. And God is like, yeah, just wait and see. You probably need this for the wicked too. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And then when the business with the scouts or the spies occurred, then Moses came back to God and said, hang on, didn't you say even for the wicked that these, obviously this is the rabbinic imagination sort of putting this dialogue in the mouths of Moses and God, but they have Moses say, you promised that this formula would work even when people weren't deserving, and now please enact it. And it points out here, the Talmud also points out that in order for this magical, if you don't mind my use of the phrase, if this formula is to work, it must be spoken aloud. Yigdal va'ata yigdalna koach Hashem ka'asher dibarta, like you have spoken. You yourself, God, have spoken this powerful phrase into existence, and we can in turn invoke this powerful phrase and remind God of God's essential nature. So we're not going to go through all this now. You can read the whole source sheet later. As always, there's way more on it than we'll actually have time to look at together. However, here we see several different verses from Psalms, which use this phrase in some form or another. I'm just scrolling through the source sheet if you're looking at the screen. We also have various of the prophets who invoke these attributes, including, interestingly, the other book that we read on Yom Kippur, which is the book of Jonah, where Jonah actually kind of states these things, but more as a complaint. He says, I knew you were going to forgive those people of Nineveh all along because you're El Chanun V'Rachum, Erech Hapayim V'Rav Chesed. You are gracious and compassionate and long-suffering. I knew there was no point in this whole rigmarole because I knew you were going to forgive them from the beginning. So here it's kind of in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way. And then various of the other prophets, again, Prophet Micah, Prophet Nahum, Nehemiah, and so forth. Okay. So those who are more academic, critically minded might say the fact that this phrase pops up in like 9 or 10 different places in the Hebrew Bible might suggest that it's very ancient, that it's been being used for a long time, and that there was a strong oral tradition of this phrase, which is how it came to be used. I'm just having a little look at all the wonderful things that people have put into the chat. Okay, so as folks in the chat are pointing out, there is some tension between the idea of God being just and God being merciful. Like, how is that going to work if God's supposedly Rav Chesed, but also Emet, as both abundant in loving kindness, but also is supposed to be preserving the truth? Don't we want a God that's actually honest? Don't we want some power which is like actually preserving what's true and what's right? Do we really? And how can these two things coexist together? If God's supposed to be truthful, how can God also be merciful? So I wonder if folks have any thoughts about that. Mitt says, is there justice without mercy, and is there mercy without justice? Good question. Can they ever really be independent of each other? Doreen says, if we all got what we deserved, we would be in big trouble. Okay, I think that's a very important, the rabbis emphasize this point, that like if the world was tried to be conducted according to strict justice, no one would have the merit to keep existing. The world would be condemned pretty quickly, and there's a wonderful midrash, actually, which I didn't bring, about the creation of human beings, where the angels are arguing that the human beings are going to be very complicated and difficult creatures and full of delusion and falsehood, and that truth won't be able to coexist with them. And God basically distracts the angels by throwing truth out of heaven, saying truth is going to have to make it work on the earth plane. And while the angels are distracted, God creates human beings and says to the angels, well, while you were chatting, it's done already. It's a very curious midrash on lots and lots of levels, but also says very explicitly that, if God was to, if truth was the guiding principle here, none of us would be lasting very long. What we really need is this continuous influx of divine compassion, that even as dire as things seem to be, there's still this sort of animating grace in the world, and for us too. Someone is also saying, how do we deal with, when bad things happen to us? Do we think of it as compensation for our own wrongdoing, or do we think of it as potentially retribution for the work of what our ancestors have done, or both or neither? And how do we actually deal with that psychologically? This is very okay. So angels absolutely, in the midrashic tradition, angels are always disagreeing with God. They're like the kind of full guy. They're the sparring partner. Thank you for everybody who's getting into conversation with one another. And we have this idea here of God being like a parent. So it's the job of a parent to be both just and merciful, right? Like the parent's supposed to hold the ring, but the parent also isn't supposed to act out. The parent's not supposed to get personally triggered. It's more to show the boundaries of what's appropriate behavior, but within a wider context of being loving, of being gracious, and of reassuring the children that the love is always there. The love is ever present. So those who want to look more into this, I highly recommend looking at Rosh Hashanah, the Talmud's Tractate Rosh Hashanah, pages 17 and 18. And you can, if you just click on this link here, it will open it in its own page, and then you can read it, and it has it in English. And it gets there a lot of different ways of looking at this verse or these verses and analyzing them, and basically coming down to the same question of like, how can you say that it's both Rav Chesed, that it's both abundant in kindness and mercy, and also just? How are those things going to be in relationship with one another? And one of the things that most extraordinary, you may have come across this before, but one of the most extraordinary aspects of this passage is where they say that when it says that God appears to Moses, what it actually means is that God appeared to Moses in the form of a prayer leader and taught him how to use this formula as a get out of jail card, basically. And then this is this idea of it being a covenant, and indeed that this covenant will be used throughout the ages. Whenever the Jewish people sin, let them act before me in accordance with this order, i.e., come together in prayer and have the prayer leader get up, and it gives the image of God like wrapped in a tallit. Let the prayer leader get up, looking like God does in the rabbinic imagination here, and say these 13 attributes, and I will forgive them. Quite an extraordinary and dramatic claim, perhaps a reassuring claim. There's so much more which we just don't have enough space here together to get to. But I do want to bring for you, in addition to these passages from the Talmud, this an incredible medieval text called the Sha'arei Orah. This is a Kabbalistic text from the 1200s, written in the territory which is sort of sometimes France, sometimes Spain, by a man named Rabbi Joseph Gicatilia. And it is, amongst other things, Sha'arei Orah means gates of light. It is, amongst other things, the first systematic description or explication of the 10 Sefirot. So it's one of the most important foundational works of Kabbalah. And he interestingly makes the choice to begin at Malchut, which is the most imminent, or the last, if you will, of the Sefirot, the one which is most accessible to us, and goes inwards towards the very center of the Godhead from there. And when he gets to the 10th gate, which is to say the first Sefirah, so the end of the book, but the beginning of the process of divine emanation, he speaks at length about this passage. I wonder If it's are you guys able to unmute yourselves, or do I have to unmute you? Maybe somebody else wants to.
If we have someone raise their hand, I can.
Oh, great! Would somebody like to read this this passage here? Text number 15. Why, David? Why don't you read for us?
Okay. What's on the screen here?
Yes. Text number 15.
Yeah, I can't read it in Hebrew. We need to explain to you the magnitude of God's mercy upon mortal beings, and that God has vouchsafed to us such powerful cosmic secrets, such that even when mortal beings have been condemned in the heavenly courts and are deserving of all sorts of punishment, the beings in the lower realms are able to overturn and transmute all that strict judgment and punishment to goodness. As it says, the righteous person shall rule by awe of God, which we can read as meaning, who shall God be in awe of? The righteous person. For I, God, issue a decree, and the righteous one annuls it. How so? Know that when there is such a righteous one in the world who is able to get so deep in their contemplation and their prayer that they can reach all the way to the realm of pure divine desire and mercy, that then, even if something is decreed on high, when the prayer of such a righteous one ascends to the level of Keter, the crown, the highest of all the Sefirot in the tree of life, then the gates of the realm of Rachamim, grace, mercy, are opened. And when that happens, all the sentences that have been decreed are nullified, since the lights of all Rachamim are lit and shining forth. And all the Sefirot become flushed with divine grace and all sorts of supernal flow and blessing. And at such time, there's nowhere in the entire Sephirotic system where Deen, strict judgment, can get a foothold, and no aspect that is attaching to anger or agitation, since the divine is situated in joy and desire, and all expressions of irritation pass away, and all agents of Deen are transformed to Rachamim. And all of this transmission of munificent grace is enacted by means of 13 supernal channels, 13 attributes embedded within the realm of justice. And none of this is really coming from the side of executing justice, but rather from the side of divine desire, ratzon, and grace, rachamim. Even though humanity is not really deserving, this statement uttered by the righteous one causes the gateways of grace to be open and the divine to enact itself through mercy and not through strict justice. And this is what is being referred to when God says, I shall be merciful to whom I shall be merciful, even though it's not strictly just. And I shall be gracious to whom I shall be gracious, even though it's not what's decreed in strict justice. For you see, when the countenance of Rachamim shines forth from the crown, everything is transformed to Rachamim. This is something that can be enacted through prayer, and also through a few other specific mitzvot that can cause the gates of the realms of divine mercy to be opened, such as the priest's blessing of the people and the mysteries of the incense and so forth. At such time as the gates of the dimension of divine rachamim are open, it is called et ratzon, a propitious moment or time of divine desire, which is to say, at that time, all the realms above and below are filled up with chesed and rachamim and ratzon, and there is no such thing as judgment or punishment there whatsoever, not a little and not a lot.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I sure appreciated hearing a different voice. Hope you did too. Okay, so this is a pretty bold claim that literally it is possible to use this phrase if you're on a high enough spiritual level, says not everyone can do this. It's only the tzaddik, the really righteous one, the really powerful davener, literally can enact this thing using this phrase where the gateways of divine compassion are open and the whole system just gets flooded with divine rachamim. And whatever has been decreed from the point of view of justice, it just kind of gets swept away by divine mercy. What do you think of this claim? It's hard to reach that level. It's very true. But we could try. The mystery of the incense, the incense also was supposed to have this. There was incense burnt in the temple or in the tabernacle and in the temple, and it also had powerful effects. Renee says, wishful thinking. Would be nice if we could enact divine rachamim whenever it's needed, but probably we can't. And how do you reach that level? And can you get there just through being sincere? I don't know that you can get there just through being sincere. If you're truly sincere, you're sincere enough to keep deep in practice for many, many years, maybe, but I don't think it's guaranteed. But it is good to have tzaddikim in this world who are praying. So yeah, this is at least the sort of pageantry of the days of awe. That we come together, we do the ritual, and we say these words again and again and again, and we hope that it has this effect. Or we say these words, I should say, not just on fast days and holidays and the high holy days, but also in slichot, in the prayers leading up to the high holidays. These 13 attributes, these phrases become the very center of the liturgy, all the way through the preparation, everything that we're doing in the run-up to the days of awe. David says, I'm not clear what ratzon, a divine desire, actually means. Yes, nobody's quite clear what it means. The word ratzon means something like desire or something like will. Yeah, I'm not on a level to really be able to explain it, other than to say it's a good thing. When God is in a space of ratzon, that's what we want. When our desire, when we say, you may have heard the phrase, Ken yehi ratzon, so may it be the will. It means sort of, may it be God's will, may it be our will, may our will be aligned with the divine will, may everything flow like it's supposed to. Okay, there's so much good commentary in the chat. I really recommend everybody be reading it. Somebody asks, is this phrase part of the vidui? Is it part of the confession? I assume you mean the confession on the deathbed. I don't remember if it is. It's an excellent question. It's not used as part of the vidui, I don't think, the communal confession that we do at Yom Kippur, as far as I remember. It's used it's actually specifically is used in our communal prayers. There's something about enacting this as a congregation as opposed to as individuals, which is meritorious. The incense formula recipe is actually in this Parashat too, amongst other places, and so you can look it up. Unfortunately for us, it says very, very clearly, like, nobody else is allowed to make it, so don't even think about it. It's very bad. So we can all wonder what it smelled like. But Maya says Ratzon is like the godfather on the occasion of his daughter's wedding. Do you want to expand a little more on what you mean by that? I love the image. Okay, so as usual, I've brought lots and lots of texts here that you can read further at your leisure, maybe over Shabbat, and discuss with family and friends. There's so much, so good. Oh, well, we didn't quite get to this part, but the Sha'arei Orah continues to say that God gave Moses this gift that would always open. There was this key that would always open the realm of divine compassion, namely the 13 attributes. And there's this thing that the rabbis say that whenever we use this phrase, our prayers will never be returned to us, meaning they will never return empty, meaning it will always work. It will always have an impact. To continually call on God and remind God of its essential nature of being fundamentally gracious, desiring to give, compassionate, endlessly forgiving, endlessly patient. This is actually the truth of the nature of the divine field. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here at all. That there must be some spontaneous desire in the divine realm to give. Otherwise, why have existence at all? So we're nearly out of time. There's a little bit more at the end of the source sheet I recommend that everyone look at in conclusion. We won't do it together though, about how it says not just that these words should be said, but that these words should be enacted. So the rabbis ask, what does it mean to enact them? It means that we also have to behave in this way of being patient, of being forgiving, of leaning on the side of mercy rather than the side of strict justice, that we also can be participating in that process of pushing the scales always towards mercy rather than retribution. I think to conclude, I'm going to play one more rendition of the setting of this beautiful prayer, and this I can give you the link to since it is YouTube. This is Nava Tehillah, the wonderful musicians of the Jewish renewal community of Jerusalem, and this is their setting of the 13 Midot. And then after that we'll
Rabbi, I think your earphones may have popped out. We were hearing you very muted. Sorry, can you try again? We missed the last sentence. Sorry.
You can't hear this? No, not hearing? Huh. Well, I turned my headphones off so that you could hear it.
Do you know if it's possible to include a YouTube link within the Sefaria source sheet? Oh, perfect.
Okay, I'll try again. Hang on. Okay, then we'll listen to the music and then that'll be a nice conclusion. One second.
נוצר חסד
the best way to burn fat and get in shape. It's not keto, paleo, fasting, or vegan, and it's not super intense workouts like CrossFit that you see all the time. That ain't.
Oh well. That was my attempt to share a beautiful setting of
Ain't how you lose weight.
verses
Cardio
with us,
burns
but
fat,
YouTube
right?
has other
No,
ideas.
cardio actually burns
All right, you guys will have to listen to it on your own time. I put the link into the chat here. I hope that works for you. Sorry about that technical glitch. So my prayer and blessing is that we should all remember these attributes of patience, of forgiveness, of generosity of spirit, and that we should become ever more divine in our walking in the world, and that God too should be inspired to remember its essential kindness and generosity of nature and flush the system with rachamim, with mercy, so that this dimension can be a dimension where everybody has what they need and everything is found to be in a state of grace. And with that, I will wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. And it was wonderful to be with you.
Shabbat shalom,
Thank you.
everyone. I can't end it any better than that. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom.